There's more to objects than the object selection tool. In this lesson, we'll take a look at the rest of the features related to objects, including shortcuts, options, and dialogues. You can duplicate one or more objects by selecting them and going to Edit, Duplicate. Or the way more easy and useful, Ctrl D. This will create a duplicate object that's created exactly on top of the original and has the exact same properties. This is a much easier and faster method than copying and then pasting an object to get another copy. Speaking of copying and pasting, the standard shortcuts apply. Ctrl C to copy an object and Ctrl V to paste it. But there's a thing you should know. Using Ctrl V will paste the object to the position of the pointer. If you want to paste to the position where you copied the object, making it the same than duplicating, use the shortcut Ctrl-Alt-B. This might seem like a redundant command, but later on I'll show you that there are moments where you might want to use copy-paste rather than duplication. But for now it's way easier to just use Ctrl D to get a copy of an object. It's possible to group multiple objects together so they behave as one. Just select the object you want in the group and then go to Object, Group. Or the really easy to remember shortcut, Ctrl G. Grouping is mostly used to handle objects more easily. Grouped objects will maintain the relative distance and stack order when you handle them. So the most common use for groups is to join multiple objects together that represent a single object in real life. If you set the fill or stroke color, it will be applied to all objects in the group. If you want to edit an object in a group, you can enter it by double-clicking in the group. You know you enter the group when a weird string appears in the status bar. Here you can work as if you never created a group. You can modify or delete objects, you can create objects inside or even other groups. When you're done editing the group, simply double-click on any place outside of the group. All changes you've done, including created objects or groups, will be kept. If you need to dismantle a group, go to Object, Ungroup. One nice thing is that both the group and ungroup options appear with the right mouse button. Clipping allows you to limit the visibility of a shape to the silhouette of another. After the clip is done, you can edit the clip shape inside with the node selection tool. And no matter what, the changes won't show outside of the silhouette area of the object. To create a clip, you use two objects. First, the object you want to limit the visibility or target object, and the object you want to use to limit the other, or clipping path. The clipping path has to be above the other in the stack order. Then you select them both and go to Object, Clip, Set. Or my favorite method, right-click, Set Clip. Once it's done, those two objects will become a single clipped object, which you can move, scale, rotate, and do pretty much everything you can do with other objects. But now you can edit the shape inside with the node selection tool, and the shape won't show outside of the clipping path. If on the node selection tool you have this button toggled on, you can edit the target object itself. To unclip, go to Object, Clip, Release. Or right-click, Release Clip. All shapes you edit will keep the changes. A common use for clipping in illustration is to draw shadows and highlights directly on top of a shape, and keep the flexibility to edit them at all times. There's also a similar feature to clipping, called masking. Masking has the same functionality than clipping, with the difference that it has a few transparency features. Clipping is simpler, so I prefer to use it over masking. And now let's take a look at a few dialogues related to handling objects. The Layers dialog allows you to create layers just like any other graphic program. They work the same way. Objects in a layer above will always look on top of the objects in a layer below. To open the Layers dialog, go to Layer, Layers. To create a layer, click on the plus button and give it a name. Every new layer you create will be placed on top of the layer stack. Every new object you create will belong to a selected layer, and if there is no layer, then they belong to none. If you want to move an object to a layer, you can go to Layer, and here you have a few options. You can move the object to a particular layer or to a layer above or below. However, my favorite way to move objects between layers is to select the objects I want to move, cut them using Ctrl X, selecting the layer I want to paste them on, and then instead of paste them right away, I use Paste in Place. The shortcut is Ctrl+B. This way I'm pasting the object in the exact same place where it was when I cut it, rather than the position of the mouse. To delete a layer, use the minus button. Keep in mind that if you delete a layer, all objects that belong to that layer will be deleted as well. So if you want to keep those objects, you'll have to manually move them to another layer before you delete anything. You can also move the layer up or down with these buttons. And of course, this will affect the visibility of the objects belonging to the layer. Keep in mind that Inkscape stacks objects on a per layer basis. An object in a layer above can never be sent below an object in a layer below, no matter the stack order of the objects in the layer. You can make the layer invisible with the eye right next to the name, or lock it with the little lock. Making the layer invisible will make the objects in the layer invisible and unselectable. Locking the layer will make the object just unselectable. It's possible to change the opacity of a layer. This will affect all objects belonging to the layer at once. Just drag the slider to the position you want. You can also input a number from 0 to 100 by clicking in the number. And finally, you can apply a blend mode to a layer. Blend modes change the way the color of an object interacts with the color of another object. I won't go into detail right now, just keep in mind that the mode will be applied to all objects of the layer. To change the blend mode, click on the blend mode drop-down and select the one you want. If you don't know what blend modes are, I would recommend you to stay away from them. In pixel-based graphic software, Layers are often used to separate the working area into arbitrary segments, so the illustration is separated into manageable components. In Inkscape, this separation is built into the program, since every object has its own independent data. So the most common use for layers in Inkscape when you're illustrating is as an organization tool, separating large quantities of objects into small groups that make sense and are easier to handle. The objects dialog gives you a list of objects that exist currently in the document. You can open it by going to Object, Objects. The objects are ordered hierarchically, based on its layer and group. Inkscape gives all objects a default name. If you double-click, you can change it. Next to the name are a locker and an eye, just like in the layers dialog. Here you can do the same you could do on a layer but on a single object. Just remember that if you lock or make an object invisible, the only way to select it is through the object dialog. So it's worth to give the important objects a name. You can change the opacity of the object, just like with the layers, but now you can also change the blurriness. The objects dialog also has a blend mode drop-down, and again is the same as the layers, with the difference that now it's applied to a single object. As you may have noticed, the objects dialog has pretty much all the functionality of the layers dialog built in. Sadly, it's a bit uncomfortable to handle layers due to the way it behaves, so if your illustration has a lot of layers, it may still be worth to keep the layers dialog there somewhere. Another extremely important dialog you'll be using all the time is the Align and Distribute dialog. You can open it by going to Object, Align and Distribute. The Align and Distribute dialog is separated into 4 sections, though for illustration you'll be using the first 2 almost exclusively. With the Align section, you can align objects relative to another one. The most important option here is the Relative To drop box. The selected objects will be aligned depending on the selected option here. And there are quite a few. You should check them one by one and see which one works best for each case. However, I can assure you that in the case of illustration, for 99% of the time, the default option last selected will be more than enough. Down below there is a checkbox. By default, objects are aligned individually, but if you have this option checked, then multiple selected objects will be treated as a group, maintaining the relative distance between them as they are aligned. All the options here are very easy to use. The objects will be aligned depending on the button you click. If you don't know what button to press, you can leave the mouse on top of a button to see the tooltip. The ones you'll be using all the time are these 2, to align the centers vertically and horizontally, and only occasionally you'll be using the others. The Distribute section is separated from the Align section. Here you can simply choose all the objects you want to distribute equidistantly and click on any of the buttons. You'll be using these 2 most of the time. This will distribute based on their centers. As far as the other sections, they aren't that helpful for illustration at least. You'll be using the Align and Distribute dialog with objects most of the time, but there is an option that appears when you select nodes. This section will give you access to a similar toolset to the align section, with the difference that it's way more simplified since you're only aligning points instead of objects.